Chapter 2. The Machine. Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Chapter 2. The Machine. The thing the time traveler held in his hand was a glittering metallic framework, scarcely larger than a small clock and very delicately made. There was ivory in it and some transparent crystalline substance. And now I must be explicit, for this that follows, unless his explanation is to be accepted, is an absolutely unaccountable thing. He took one of the small octagonal tables that were scattered about the room and set it in front of the fire with two legs on the hearthrug. On this table he placed the mechanism. Then he drew up a chair and sat down. The only other object on the table was a small shaded lamp, the bright light of which fell upon the model. There were also perhaps a dozen candles about, two in brass candlesticks upon the mantel, and several in sconces, so that the room was brilliantly illuminated. I sat in a low armchair nearest the fire, and I drew this forward so as to be almost between the time traveller and the fireplace. Philby sat behind him, looking over his shoulder. The medical man and the provincial mayor watched him in profile from the right, the psychologist from the left. The very young man stood behind the psychologist. We were all on the alert. It appears incredible to me that any kind of trick, however thoroughly conceived and however adroitly done, could have been played upon us under these conditions. The time traveller looked at us and then at the mechanism. "Well," said the psychologist. "This little affair," said the time traveller, resting his elbows upon the table and pressing his hands together above the apparatus, "is only a model. It is my plan for a machine to travel through time. You will notice that it looks singularly askew, and there is an odd twinkling appearance about this bar, as though it was in some way unreal. It was in some way unreal." He pointed to the part with his finger. "Also here is one little white lever, and here is another." The medical man got up out of his chair and peered into the thing. "It's beautifully made," he said. "It took 2 years to make," retorted the time traveller. Then, when we had all imitated the action of the medical man, he said, "Now I want you clearly to understand that this lever being pressed over sends the machine gliding into the future, and this other reverses the motion. This saddle represents the seat of a time traveller. Presently I am going to press the lever, and off the machine will go. It will vanish, pass into the future time, and disappear. Have a good look at the thing. Have a good look at the thing. Look at the table too, and satisfy yourself there is no trickery. I don't want to waste this model and then be told I'm a quack." There was a minute's pause perhaps. The psychologist seemed about to speak to me, but changed his mind. Then the time traveller put forth his finger towards the lever. "No," he said suddenly, "lend me your hand." And turning to the psychologist, he took that individual's hand in his own and told him to put out his forefinger, so that it was the psychologist himself who sent forth the model time machine on its interminable voyage. We all saw the lever turn. I am absolutely certain there was no trickery. There was a breath of wind, and lamp flame jumped. One of the candles on the mantel was blown out, and the little machine suddenly swung around, became indistinct, was seen as a ghost for a second perhaps, as an eddy of faintly glittering brass and ivory, and it was gone, vanished. Save for the lamp, the table was bare. Everyone was silent for a minute. Then Philby said he was damned. The psychologist recovered from his stupor and suddenly looked under the table. At that, the time traveller laughed cheerfully. "Well," he said, with a reminiscence of the psychologist. Then getting up, he went to the tobacco jar on the mantel and with his back to us began to fill his pipe. We stared at each other. "Look here," said the medical man. "Are you in earnest about this? Do you seriously believe that that machine has traveled into time?" "Certainly," said the time traveler, stooping to light a spill at the fire. Then he turned, lighting his pipe, to look at the psychologist's face. The psychologist, to show that he was not unhinged, helped himself to a cigar and tried to light it uncut. "What is more, I have a big machine nearly finished in there." He indicated the laboratory. "And when that is put together I mean to have a journey on my own account." "You mean to say that that machine has travelled into the future?" said Philby. "Into the future or the past. I don't for certain know which." After an interval the psychologist had an inspiration. "It must have gone into the past if it has gone anywhere," he said. "Why?" said the time traveler. "Because I presume that it has not moved in space, and if it travelled into the future, it will still be here all this time, since it must have travelled through this time." "But," said said I, "if it travelled into the past, it would have been visible when we came first into this room, and last Thursday when we were here, and the Thursday before that, and so forth." "Serious objections," remarked the provincial mayor, with an air of impartiality, turning towards the time traveller. "Not a bit," said the time traveller, and to the psychologist, "You think you can explain that? It's presentation below the threshold, you know, diluted presentation." "Of course," said the psychologist, and reassured us. "That's a simple point in psychology. I should have thought of it. It's plain enough, and helps the paradox delightfully. We cannot see it, nor can we appreciate this machine, any more than we can the spoke of a wheel spinning, or a bullet flying through the air. If it is traveling through time 50 times or 100 times faster than we are, if it gets through a minute while we get through a second, the impression it creates will of course be only 1/50th or 1/100th of what it would make if it were not traveling in time. That's plain enough." He passed his hand through the space in which the machine had been. "You see," he said, laughing. We sat and stared at the vacant table for a minute or so. Then the time traveller asked us what we thought of it all. "It sounds plausible enough tonight," said the medical man, "but wait until tomorrow. Wait for the common sense of the morning." "Would you like to see the time machine itself?" asked the time traveller, and therewith, taking the lamp in his hand, he led the way down the long, draughty corridor to his laboratory. I remember vividly the flickering light, his queer, broad head in silhouette, then the dance of the shadows, how we all followed him, puzzled but incredulous, and how there in the laboratory we beheld the larger edition of the little mechanism which we had seen vanish from before our eyes. Parts were of nickel, parts were parts of ivory, parts had certainly been filed or sewn out of rock crystal. The thing was generally complete, but the twisted crystalline bars lay unfinished upon the bench beside some sheets of drawings, and I took one up for a better look at it. Quartz it seemed to be. "Look here," said the medical man, "are you perfectly serious, or is this a trick, like that ghost you showed us last Christmas?" "Upon that machine," said the time traveller, holding the lamp aloft, "I intend to explore time. Is that plain? I was never more serious in my life." None of us quite knew how to take it. I caught Philby's eye over the shoulder of the medical man, and he winked at me solemnly. Chapter 3. The time traveler returns. I think that at that time none of us quite believed in the time machine. The fact is, the time traveler was one of those men who are too clever to be believed. You never felt that you saw all around him. You always suspected some subtle reserve, some ingenuity in ambush behind his lucid frankness. Had Philby shown the model and explained the matter in the time traveler's words, we should have shown him far less skepticism, for we should have perceived his motives. A pork butcher, a pork butcher could understand Philby, but the time traveler had more than a touch of whim among his elements, and we distrusted him. Things that would have made the fame of a less clever man seemed tricks in his hands. It is a mistake to do things too easily. The serious people who took him seriously never felt quite sure of his deportment. They were somehow aware that trust in their reputations for judgment with him was like furnishing a nursery with eggshell china. So I don't think any of us said very much about the time travel in the interval between that Thursday and the next, though its out potentialities ran, no doubt, in most of our minds. Its plausibility, that is, its practical incredibleness, the curious possibilities of anachronism and of utter confusion it suggested. For my own part, I was particularly preoccupied with the trick of the model, that I remember discussing with the medical man, whom I met on Friday at the Linnean. He said he had seen a similar thing at Tübingen, and laid considerable stress on the blowing out of the candle. But how the trick was done he could not explain. The next Thursday I went again to Richmond. I suppose I was one of the time traveler's most constant guests, and arriving late, found 4 or 5 men already assembled in his drawing room. The medical man was standing before the fire with a sheet of paper in one hand and his watch in the other. I looked round for the time traveler, and it's 7:30 now, said the medical man. I suppose we'd better have dinner. Where's, said I, naming our host. You've just come? It's rather odd. He's unavoidably detained. He asked me in this note to lead off with dinner at 7 if he's not back. Says he'll explain when he comes. It seems a pity to let the dinner spoil, said the editor of a well-known daily paper, and thereupon the doctor rang the bell. The psychologist was the only person besides the doctor and myself who had attended the previous dinner. The other men were blank, the editor aforementioned, a certain journalist, and another, a quiet, shy man with a beard, whom I didn't know, and who, as far as my observation went, never opened his mouth all the evening. There was some speculation at the dinner table about the time traveller's absence, and I suggested time travelling in a half-jocular spirit. The editor wanted that explained to him, and the psychologist volunteered a wooden account of the ingenious paradox and trick we had witnessed that day week. He was in the midst of his exposition when the door from the corridor opened slowly and without noise. I was facing the door and saw it first. "Hallo," I said, at last, and the door opened wider, and the time traveller stood before us. I gave a cry of surprise. "Good heavens, man, what's the matter?" cried the medical man, who saw him next, and the whole tableful turned towards the door. He was in an amazing plight. His coat was dusty and dirty, and smeared with green down the sleeves. his hair disordered and it seemed to me grayer, either with dust and dirt or because its color had actually faded. His face was ghastly pale, his chin had a brown cut on it, a cut half healed. His expression was haggard and drawn, as by intense suffering. For a moment he hesitated in the doorway, as if he had been dazzled by the light. Then he came into the room. He walked with just such a limp as I have seen in a footsore tramp's. We stared at him in silence, expecting him to speak. He said not a word, but came painfully to the table and made a motion towards the wine. The editor filled a glass of champagne and pushed it towards him. He drained it, and it seemed to do him good, for he looked round the table and the ghost of his old smile flickered across his face. "What on earth have you been up to, man?" said the doctor. The time traveler didn't seem to hear. "Don't let me disturb you," he said with a certain faltering articulation. "I'm all right." He stopped, held out his glass for more, and took it off at a draught. "That's good," he said. His eyes grew brighter, and a faint color came into his cheeks. His glance flickered over our faces with a certain dull approval, and then went round the warm and comfortable room. Then he spoke again, still as it were feeling his way among his words. "I'm going to wash and dress, and then I'll come down and explain things. Save me some of that mutton. I'm starving for a bit of meat." He looked across at the editor, who was a rare visitor, and I hoped he was all right. The editor began a question. "Tell you presently," said the time traveler. I'm funny. Be all right in a minute." He put down his glass and walked toward the staircase door. Again I remarked his lameness and the soft padding sound of his footfall, and standing up in my place, I saw his feet as he went out. He had nothing on them but a pair of tattered, blood-stained socks. Then the door closed upon him. I had half a mind to follow till I remembered how he detested any fuss about himself. For a minute, perhaps, my mind was wool-gathering. Then, "Remarkable behavior of an eminent scientist," I heard the editor say, thinking, after his wont, in headlines, and this brought my attention back to the bright dinner table. "What's the game?" said the journalist. Has he been doing the amateur cadger?" "I don't follow." I met the eye of the psychologist and read my own interpretation in his face. I thought of the time traveler limping painfully upstairs. I don't think anyone else had noticed his lameness. The first to recover completely from this surprise was the medical man who rang the bell. The time traveler hated to have servants waiting at dinner for a hot plate. At that the editor turned to his knife and fork with a grunt, and the silent man followed suit. The dinner was resumed. Conversation was exclamatory for a little while, with gaps of wonderment, and then the editor got fervent in his curiosity. "Does our friend eke out his modest income with the crossing, or has he his Nebuchadnezzar phases?" he inquired. "I feel assured it's this business of the time machine," I said, and took up the psychologist's account of our previous meeting. The new guests were frankly incredulous. The editor raised objections. What was this time traveling? A man couldn't cover himself with dust by rolling in a paradox, could he? And then, as the idea came home to him, he resorted to caricature. Hadn't they any clothes brushes in the future? The journalist, too, would not believe at any price, and joined the editor in the easy work of heaping ridicule on the whole thing. They were both the new kind of journalists, very joyous, irreverent young men. Our special correspondent in the Day After Tomorrow reports, the journalist was saying, or rather shouting, when the time traveler came back. He was dressed in ordinary evening clothes, and nothing save his haggard look remained of the change that had startled me. "I say," said the editor hilariously, "these chaps here say you have been travelling into the middle of next week. Tell us all about little Roseberry, will you? What will you take for the lot?" The time traveller came to the place reserved for him without a word. He smiled quietly in his old way. "Where's my mutton?" he said. "What a treat it is to stick fork into meat again." "Story!" cried the editor. "Story be damned!" said the time traveller. "I want something to eat. I won't say a word until I get some peptone into my arteries. Thanks, and the salt." "One word," said I. "Have you been time travelling?" "Yes, yes," said the time traveller with his mouth full, nodding his head. "I'd give a shilling a line for a verbatim note," said the editor. The time traveller pushed his glass toward the silent man and rang it with his fingernail, at which the silent man, who had been staring at his face, started convulsively and poured in wine. The rest of the dinner was uncomfortable, but for my own part, sudden questions kept on rising to my lips, and I dare say it was the same, with the others. The journalist tried to relieve the tension by telling anecdotes of Hetty Potter. The time traveller devoted his attention to his dinner and displayed the appetite of a tramp. The medical man smoked a cigarette and watched the time traveller through his eyelashes. The silent man seemed even more clumsy than usual, and drank champagne with regularity and determination out of sheer nervousness. At last the time traveller pushed his plate away and looked around us. "I suppose I must apologize," he said. "I was simply starving. I've had a most amazing time." He reached out his hand for a cigar and cut the end. "But come into the smoking room. It's too long a story to tell over greasy plates." And ringing the bell in passing, he led the way into the adjoining room. "You have told Blank and Dash and Jones about the machine," he said to me, leaning back in his easy chair and naming the three new guests. But thing's a mere paradox," said the editor. "I can't argue tonight. I don't mind telling you the story, but I can't argue. I will," he went on, "tell you the story of what has happened to me, if you like, but you must refrain from interruptions. I want to tell it badly. Most of it will sound like lying. So be it. It's true, every word of it, all the same. I was in my laboratory at 4 o'clock, and since then I've lived 8 days, such days as no human being ever lived before. I'm nearly worn out, but I shan't sleep till I've told this thing over to you. Then I shall go to bed, but no interruptions. Is it agreed?" "Agreed," said the editor, and the rest of us echoed agreed. And with that the time traveller began his story as I have set it forth. He sat back in his chair at first, and spoke like a weary man. Afterwards he got more animated. In writing it down I feel with only too much keenness the inadequacy of pen and ink, and above all my own inadequacy to express its quality. You read, I will suppose, attentively enough, but you cannot see the speaker's white, sincere face in the bright circle of the little lamp, nor hear the intonation of his voice. You cannot know how his expression followed the turns of his story. Most of us hearers were in shadow, for the candles in the smoking room hadn't been lighted, and only the face of the journalist and the legs of the silent man from the knees downward were illuminated. At first we glanced now and again at each other. After a time we ceased to do that, and looked only at the time traveler's face. End of chapter 3. Thank you for listening.